Good afternoon, Peter Crowley. Thanks for joining us here at Yellow Shelf.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. That was very kind of you.
Pleasure. Congrats on your newly released book, Townsend of the Ranges.
Thank
Peter,
you.
this is a story about a surveyor, a
Yeah.
very influential surveyor.
Yes.
I'm going to hand over to you to tell us all about the book. What do we need to know?
Well, it's my first book, and it's thank you, and it's a book about a surveyor. So for surveyor, just think map maker. That's probably the easiest way of thinking about it. And it's a biography of a surveyor called Thomas Scott Townsend. And perhaps for those in Australia and also overseas, Thomas Scott Townsend's the man after whom Australia's second highest mountain is named. So if I could take you to the Snowy Mountains, well, Australians would all know that Mount Kosciuszko was the
Yeah.
highest mountain on the mainland. But just next door is another mountain that's shorter than Kosciuszko by the length of a cricket pitch, and that's Mount Townsend. So
Okay.
that book is the first biography of the surveyor that mountain is named after, and it's a significant story because Townsend is a pretty mysterious figure. He's really just been forgotten by history for reasons that the book goes into. So my book is the first chronicle of his life. So it's non-fiction. It's Australian colonial history. So it takes place in the age of the squatters. So think 1830s and 1840s. It's set in the southeast of Australia. The action takes place during what I call the land rush, which is the period in Australian history when the process of European seizure of land from the First Nations was at its most intense. Can you hear the thunder in the
I
background?
can hear the thunder. That gives it atmosphere.
Perfect atmosphere for talking about Townsend. And it's a simple narrative history, and it's written for a general audience. I want everybody to encourage everybody to read the book. You don't need to be a surveyor. I'm not a surveyor. I know
Yeah.
about surveying, and it's really it's a story. It's a human interest story, a very compelling human interest story, which tackles a few historical tangles on the way that touch on Townsend's life. And it's published by the NLA and their brilliant team. And it was a great honour to be published by NLA Publishing.
Yeah.
So why does someone, an aging medical practitioner, I'm a medical doctor, decide to write a book about this? It's a strange thing to do. I'm an intensely curious person,
Yep.
and I like to take a deep dive into pretty much everything. And I've long had a desire to write a story about the geographical and the historical landscape of my home in southeastern Australia. Really a lifelong desire, but I never felt that I had the story that would allow me to write about the themes I needed to have a story that had the right geography. I grew up in the Victorian region of Gippsland, and developed a love affair with the Australian snow country, like the Australian Alps and the high country, when I was quite young. So I had to have those elements. I loved romantic bush literature,
Mhm.
particularly the way it evokes the experience of uh, longing and loneliness and pathos. And I wanted to pay my homage to that way of storytelling. Like, I kind of think of the book as a bit of a campfire yarn, really, albeit a long one. But I couldn't write it unless I found a way to tell the story that didn't also touch on the history of Indigenous dispossession in the southeast
Sure.
and frontier violence, because, as you know, Australian romantic bush literature
Yes.
tends not to concern itself with those sorts of
Sure.
issues. So I couldn't write a story that sort of colluded in the fiction of terra nullius. So
Yeah.
telling the story of a survey was actually a way of not only grappling with his experience, but also a lens for looking at colonisation in the southeast. I come from a region in Gippsland where I went to school, where frontier violence was particularly harrowing.
Yeah.
And it's a story that needs to be told, and needs to be out there. And other writers have done it before me, but I want to tell my own version of that story as well. So Townsend's story is a surveyor who worked in Gippsland at the time these events were taking place, gave me the opportunity to do that. So somehow I had to work out a way of telling the story that entwined all these elements, and that's what took a long time. It took me a long time to work out how to tell this story, let alone having to do a whole lot of original archival research. The book is based entirely on my own primary source research in Australia and in the United Kingdom. Townsend, the sources for Townsend's life are all over the place. You know, some of them are in the UK, some of them are in Victoria, some of them are in New South Wales. So how did I find the story? Well, it was a bit of an accident, really. It was just an accident of a moment of idle curiosity. I was just sort of sitting around one summer's afternoon, and I decided to I was just looking at a map, and I looked at that straight line section of the border between Victoria and New South Wales, you know, the one that runs from the source of the Murray to the coast. And I wondered if it had a name, and it did. It was called the Black Allen Line.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And then I learned that that was laid out on the ground in the 1870s. But there's a problem with that because Victoria, as you'll know, Victoria separated from New South Wales to form an independent colony in 1851. So someone must have found the starting point of that line in the before 1851. To put it another way, who discovered which European was the first to locate the source of the Murray? You know, and I couldn't find an easy answer to that question. It took a bit of looking, and then I came across this name, Thomas Scott Townsend, and I thought that's interesting, but could not find really any significant information about him at all. And then I started, you know, wandering around the map of the Snowy Mountains, and I just didn't know what the second highest mountain in Australia was called. So I looked it up, and it was called Mount Townsend, near Mount Kosciuszko. So there was the name again.
Yeah,
so
wow.
I asked myself, is that the same Townsend? And it was. So the second highest mountain in Australia was named after a surveyor. So then I just did what you do. I Googled it. And, no entry in the Australian Dictionary of Biography, no entry on Wikipedia, no personal biographical information in a small amount of material that had been written, just shrouded in mystery and almost a folkloric figure more than an historical figure. And I thought, how could no one have actually found out who this person is? What did he do? Why does he matter? And turns out he mattered a lot.
Yeah, wow.
So, he was an extraordinarily prolific surveyor. He really laid out the blueprint for, European colonisation of southeastern Australia. There are many towns that wouldn't exist if it weren't for Townsend. For example, he laid out the town of Albury up on the Murray River.
Yep.
He was the first European to identify the source of the Murray, and he was the first person to do a traverse survey of the Snowy Mountains. So he was the surveyor who first mapped the Great Dividing Range in the heart of the Australian snow country. And it's quite possible, based on my research, that he was actually the first European, he and his men, to stand on the, sorry, that's very, I do apologise, to stand on the summit of Mount Kosciuszko. So there was a lot to say about him.
Yeah.
He was also his story was very compelling. I sometimes wonder whether the book should have come with a bit of a trigger warning, because Townsend's story has a lot of darkness in it.
Yep.
Readers won't take too much, won't have to wait too long before they find out how Townsend's life ended.
Yeah.
Um, and, uh, and, and it will come as no surprise that the circumstances surrounding his death do, I think, feed into the reasons for why he's been so poorly remembered.
Okay.
That and the fact that he just didn't make things very easy for historians. He didn't make himself an easy target for historians to locate.
Okay.
He didn't leave a portrait.
Yes.
He
Wow.
didn't write a diary. He didn't leave a diary or a
Yep.
journal. He didn't live into a healthy old age so that he could write a book about his travels like some surveyors did. And he, so he was not an easy target to get a fix on. The great satisfaction that came from researching his story, that once I managed to work out who his family were, I mean, there'd always been a legend that he was from a wealthy, well-to-do family in England, but once I got a fix on who his family were, the story started to open up, and it was very moving. And the reason, really the main reason I wrote the book was, I think I just really felt for him and his family, and
Sure.
I felt that he'd been denied his due place in
Yeah.
history. It was just sad that a man who contributed so much to public duty, had been forgotten. So I decided that I'd try and be the first person to write down his story, and 7 years later,
Wow.
here I am. So it took a long time.
And Peter, you've done a stellar job at telling the story. I think, good on you for being curious, because now, all the more reason for people to read the book, to find out, the dark times, to find out, the estranged family situation, and the enormous work that you've done in the research of this, from articles and letters and even maps as well. And yeah, look, thank you for being curious, because I think you've told a story that could have easily slipped away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm really, I don't know. I always had this sort of funny feeling of Townsend's ghost standing behind me, looking over my shoulder,
Yeah.
as I was sort of working away into the
Yeah.
late into the night, because I wrote this book when I'm still working as a full-time medical practitioner, which is why my phone annoyingly keeps going off. So
That's important. Yeah.
I had to, you're in the middle of something, but I
Yep.
had to, combine that with a day job, which meant a lot of late night work.
Sure.
So I felt often Townsend was a very demanding man, and felt that I could sense his presence looking over my shoulder, urging me to do better as the years went by. Yeah.
Oh, look, well done, Peter. And is there any curiosity for a next book, or is it too soon? Is your curiosity going to take us elsewhere in the future?
No, I actually, Joe, I actually find writing very hard. I
Yeah.
find it an exercise in torture, really. So I'm not, I'm not a professional writer,
Yeah,
far from it.
sure.
And so I really had to teach myself the craft of writing
Yep.
from scratch, which was quite difficult to do, because I'm in my late 50s, so I don't know. And I look, every sentence in that book has been rewritten and polished and rewritten
Yeah.
100 times. So I'm that kind of writer. So I'm not really sure at the moment whether I've got another book in
Yeah.
there.
Well,
So,
just enjoy the launch, enjoy the book, and the rewards it brings to others, and obviously to yourself, because it is an accomplishment to write a book, and to be able to tell the story of Thomas Townsend.
thank you very much, Joe.
Yeah. Peter, just finally, what's the best way to connect with you? If we're listening to this anywhere in the world,
Sure.
do you have a website? Do you have, a social media presence? How do we get curious about you or the book?
Look, maybe partly as a consequence of my age, I'm not a big social media person, but
Whoa, I think that might be Thomas Townsend.
I think it might be. It's strange. And my two dogs have just freaked out as
Oh
well.
no.
Look, but please feel free just to email me. So I'm on petercrowley1@icloud.com.
Okay. Well, look, I'll put that in the show notes, but I'm sure I can put a link in elsewhere to make sure people can track you down either through me or
Yeah,
yeah, just through the publisher as well on
through
where
the
to get the
publisher.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Greenlight Publishing as well. And look, I'm always happy to get feedback and always happy to talk to people
Well,
about.
you never know who you're going to touch or inspire or
Yeah,
who has a story to share about Thomas Townsend or something. So who knows? But
look,
that's the nice thing.
yeah, I once asked a well-known Australian historian, whether there were any more news stories to tell about Australian history, and he said, "Oh, absolutely, the best stories are still out there waiting to be."
Wow.
So I think everybody should keep that in mind. We've all got
Yeah.
great stories in our closets, I think, and it's amazing we're pursuing those leads can, end up in this case in a
Yeah.
book. But yeah, so no, thank you. And thank you for your interest.
Oh,
That's
it's a pleasure. Look, good on you for being curious. I think you're telling the story, and that's what it's all about. So, Peter, all the best. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate it. It was lovely to meet you.
Yeah, pleasure.